How's it going? So today we're going to look at some of the key events, key themes of episode 1 of season 2 of House of the Dragon, and how this kind of links up with the trailer for the weeks ahead. So something notable that I want to touch on is this idea of class disparity that's really highlighted throughout the episode. You know, from the petitions to Aegon, where he explicitly says our victory depends on the efforts of the small folk, to Blood and Cheese at the end of the episode, where Damon and Kristen were using gold coins, you know, to mark out their war planning on their map that they were using, and Blood comes in and steals the coins immediately as soon as he comes into the room. This whole episode kind of signals this class disparity, this exploitation of the lowborn by the ruling classes to do their dirty work, you know, to do their bidding, to commit these unsavoury deeds so that the royals don't have to dirty their hands. And, you know, we see this with Blood and Cheese obviously being these opportune criminals for hire that really didn't show very much interest in Damon's requests until he was, you know, offering up a substantial payment, you know, offering these tributes, offering to pay off these debts. We see this with Mysaria being exploited by one side of the royals, you know, for these secrets that she gained through her vast network of spies that had been operating within the keep. And, you know, she then faces an attempted assassination from the other side of the royal house, who, you know, did not get to exploit her, did not get use from her. So we see this in the small folk petitioning scene, where, you know, those who are providing material support to the royal house, you know, these material assets and service to the royal house, are petitioning Aegon for a remedial standard of living, and, you know, even that is denied. Then we see it again with Alicent's servants, who were entirely purged, murdered by Lord Larys for their collusion with Mysaria. And then there is this installation of an entire new body of staff who are all also being exploited for information, but now by Lord Larys rather than Mysaria. So there are all these different layers, and we even get to see it to an extent with Kristen Cole. You know, he was a lowborn that ended up making his way up through the ranks because, you know, Rhaenyra appointed him, and he is almost seen as, you know, this, or he becomes this lay for royal woman that he serves when they feel that they need to reclaim power that they otherwise feel that they, you know, lost in the political machinations of King's Landing. So they feel like they need to regain some sort of power, agency, and they take that from this sexual relationship that they cultivate with him. And so we just constantly see these examples of lower-born people being exploited by the ruling classes who feel entitled to do that. And all of this kind of seems like it's going to be a prelude to these food riot scenes that we've seen in all the trailers. You know, it seems like it's going to be a prelude to an uprising of the small folk that, you know, the royals aren't particularly concerning themselves with at the minute, because they're so fixated on the microcosms of their own and their house politics and succession and usurping that they feign obliviousness, despite the fact that Aegon explicitly stated that victory is dependent on the collaboration of the small folk. You know, it is built on the back of the small folk. The armies are built of the small folk. They're the ones that have to go out and have to go and die for the crown. But, you know, there's this fixation that they're so completely oblivious to, you know, the toil of the masses, who are largely unconcerned with who sits the throne, you know, as long as they don't burn, because realistically their conditions aren't going to change a whole lot. You know, their destitution goes unresolved either way, regardless if he sits on the Iron Throne. Even in the scene where the small folk are petitioning King Aegon, and he does genuinely seem sympathetic. I think, you know, that scene is one of the best scenes that depict, you know, King Aegon is somewhat likeable, and that is all credit to Tom Glencarney. So even in this scene where he is seemingly sympathetic, genuinely sympathetic to their plight, and wishes to resolve their issues, you know, he's trying to make the shepherd's flock whole, and he, you know, immediately offers to give the full payment to the smiths when Hugh the Hammer goes up to petition. And, you know, it doesn't, even in that scenario, it doesn't take long for, for the wringing of his bountiful hand, of all his generosity, when Otto goes up and kind of presents this decision between appeasing the small folk or fueling the war effort, fueling this war machine that all of these, particularly the men in power in this past episode, have really displayed a fixation with. So even in that scenario where the common people are partly being spoken for, still this fixation on the war machine and the royals' desire to go and play politics with each other continues to go ahead of the needs of the small folk. It's even more poignant because this is from a character who was completely reluctant to step up and take the throne. He had no interest. He ran from it, he hid from it, and he tried to fight his way out of the situation when they did eventually catch him and tried to bring him back and install him on the throne. And the only time that he showed any desire to even partake in this role, to even engage in life as a royal, was when he went up and raised Blackfire in front of the crowds and had that validation of the small folk cheering him and celebrating his coronation. And he was a character who wanted nothing but his parents' love and attention, and he only came to fill that void through the adoration of the small folk in that scene. This is a character that spent more than enough time in Flea Bottom, dwelling amongst the small folk and indulging in his more unsavoury desires, admittedly. But, there's just constantly this repeated idea of the small folk are constantly suffering under the hands of these royals. Under their rule, there is no victory for the small folk, despite the fact that the small folk are key to their victory. So one of the most significant things that I think this series, House of the Dragon, tries to wrestle with is ideas of motherhood. And this is a very, very poignant episode for that, particularly with, Rhaenyra going and looking for Luke's body, but also, Alicent trying to find some agency over her own life when she's only ever really been seen as a pawn in Otto's plot. And then, she was taken on as the wife of Viserys, and she was made to pump out heirs, and then she was made to be a mother to them. And now that they're, grown and Aegon's installed on the throne and Helena has her own children to tend to and Aemond is off plotting a war, she's kind of rediscovering what it means to come away from that tight boundary of motherhood that had entrapped her in the Red Keep for so long and restricted all of her movements and interpersonal relationships. But then also there's this massive scene at the end with blood and cheese, and we see Helena, who we've only really seen her in a maternal role. We've seen her multiple times in the rooms with the children. She spends a lot of time with them. It's actually notable that at the start of this episode she is weaving what then becomes the shroud of her son. In the exact same scene she says that she's afraid of the rats. So again, bringing around this idea that she is a dragon dreamer and that she does have prophetic visions. So it only, makes this ending sequence more dreadful because we don't know what she's seen. She is completely fixed in a state of grief. Like the same people that have something to say about Helena's reaction were all praised for Emma Darcy's portrayal through the season 1 finale upon hearing of Luke's death, which was again, a long prolonged stare with no actual dialogue or, no meltdown. There was no screaming, there was no flailing around the place. It was a very controlled reaction to utterly dreadful news. And even earlier in this episode, whenever she finds, Luke's cloak and Arrax's wing, she continues to have a controlled reaction. She cries, but it's no complete, overwhelming sense of emotion. It's more of an internalized grief. And when you couple this with the fact that, Helena is supposed to be a neurodivergent character, like supposedly she wasn't hysterical enough, but Rhaenyra's quiet rage followed by quiet grief was a completely understandable reaction to the death of a child, of a son, of an heir of sorts. but Helena's wasn't, even though she was clearly depicted in a complete state of shock and had this freeze response immediately followed by a flee response when she picks up Jaehaera and she runs down the hall into Alison's room. And when she's running in this hall, she stops and starts gasping for air like she's hyperventilating. Then she enters Alison's room, and Alison's there with Kristen Cole, and she doesn't even react to that because she's so completely and entirely consumed with the shock and the grief of what just happened. And I think the actress portrayed that very well. Again, with this idea that she is a neurodivergent character, she initially tries to barter, but obviously this doesn't work. It's not what they're looking for. They're there for a son for a son, as he said. That's what Damon said. And in this scenario, she is given direct instruction by Cheese: if you don't tell us, we're going to kill a lot of you. And if we are to assume that she is a neurodivergent character, she is responding directly to a direct order, which I think makes perfect sense for the character and was portrayed very well. And the only reason that she and her daughter lives is because of her reaction, because she gave up the son, because while they were preoccupied with beheading Jaehaera's, she went over and got Jaehaera and fled the room. And that's really the only reason that they both survived, was because of her reaction. So I think it was perfectly reasonable. Then it's notable in the Weeks Ahead trailer, we see Rhaenyra furiously lambasting Damon in her court, saying, "You've wounded me, you've weakened my claim to the throne," knowing right well that the High Lords nor the small folk would enthusiastically exalt her as a queen if they perceive her as a kinslayer who would order the beheading of her own nephew. But furthermore, I think she's going to be wrestling with the guilt of knowing that the catalyst for Jaehaera's murder stems from her demanding that she wants Aemon Targaryen, and Damon's bloodlust for war and revenge drove him to enlist a pair of seedy and dishonourable hitmen for hire who went and chose an easy target rather than actually seeking out the intended target, Aemon. This guilt will only be further exacerbated by the realisation that now her own half-sister is, she's just suffered the loss of a son as well as Rhaenyra, and so is fated to plunge into this pool of inconsolable grief and lamenting that Rhaenyra herself has been wallowing in for the past 10 days or so. So there's a clip of Damon in the Weeks Ahead trailer, and there's speculation that he's crying in this clip, and this begs the question, obviously, what is he crying over? Does he feel regret over the blood and cheese incident because it didn't actually go how he necessarily instructed them to carry it out? Or, is he sulking over Rhaenyra's anger towards him? Does he feel embarrassed because she called him out in front of their court? Or is this a final outpouring of grief that we have not yet seen from him, for the grief of losing his wife Laena, his brother Viserys, his stillborn daughter, and his stepson? So we're left the question, has this grief finally hit him? Because we really haven't seen him process any of that. It's always just been him translating his hurt into rage, which is exactly the direction that Aegon appears to be going, based on this Weeks Ahead trailer that we've got, and I imagine we're going to see in episode 2. Everybody still wondering what magnanimous means? I wouldn't worry about it, because I don't think we're going to be seeing a whole lot of it after this.